Hey everybody, and welcome to the library. Today we have a very special guest, Tammy Jo Eckhart. Tammy Jo is the author of Day and Tonight, Almost Partners, True You 101 at her feet, and she produced a magazine called Eckhart's Edgy Fiction Zine. She's also the co-author of Our Lives, Our History, Consensual Master-Slave Relationships from Ancient Times to the 21st Century. Let me introduce you to our author today, Tammy Jo Eckhart.
Hi, everyone. Um, Hopefully you can all hear me. I came today with some selections of reading to share with you. Sadly, we don't have the second edition of At Her Feet available yet. They are still going through the printing process at the publishers. Hooray for traditional publishing, right? But I did bring the introduction to it because in the introduction, we talk a little bit about why we did the second edition at all. So I thought I would start with that. That sound good to everybody? All right. So the introduction is called Welcome to Life Like You Can't Imagine It. Have you ever asked yourself these questions about femdom relationships? Are mistresses always right? Are slaves powerless? Can feminine people be dominant? Can masculine people be submissive? Do I have to have rules, protocols, and rituals? Do I need to identify as cisgender to have a femdom relationship? Does the DS have to stop when I'm sick or injured? How can I be in the mood if I'm worried about money? How can I become a better slave or mistress? How important is sex? How many of my family and friends will I lose if I do this 24/7? How true are those porn images I see? Is age a factor in how we can live 24/7 or our desire for it? Is love necessary? Is there a right or best way to do BDSM? Must I identify as feminine or masculine to be part of a DS relationship? Will my fetish get in the way of my relationship? These are just some of the questions we'll address in the At Her Feet Powering Your Femdom Relationship Edition 2. We'll tackle all the traditional questions about setting up your dominant and submissive or mistress and slave relationship, but also look honestly at how all this kinky stuff works day in and day out for years. For us, the authors, we've made this one mistress-slave relationship work for over 2 decades, and that's only the most recent relationship we successfully had. I'm going to pause here and tell you, by the way, October, it will be 25 years. It'll be our silver anniversary of Mistress and Slave. So see, it can work. And I'm a little sassy sometimes, just so you know. We think you've picked up this book because you're looking for a relationship where the woman or feminine leaning partner is in charge of the bedroom and perhaps outside of it. You can shorthand that to femdom, as we did with the title and do throughout the book. Perhaps you identify as a man or a masculine leaning person, but have a desire to be submissive, and you want to know if you're alone in your desires. You can shorthand your identity to male sub, as we do. You might be struggling with finding a partner who accepts your drive to kneel. You may be a woman or feminine leaning individual who feels frustrated by the choices you seem to be offered in the BDSM community or the mass media when it comes to the idea of being dominant. You might be wondering if there's a kneeling knight out there who's also craving your rule. You may also be picking up this book because you're in a femdom relationship, but you're concerned that it isn't going to last beyond the first few passionate months. Perhaps you've been together for a year or two and you feel like things are just going stale. You might have been a femdom for years and you're just curious to see if others' journeys resonate with your own. We've been there, right there where you are. We understand your feelings and thoughts. We respect the desire to find just the perfect someone and settle down. We also know the pull towards multiple relationships that meet different criteria and that all work toward the same goal. Between the two of us, we have over half a century of experience in BDSM, over two decades of that in our mutual MS or 24/7 polyamorous femdom household. We want to share with you how we got to this place and the truths we've learned about ourselves, our community, and the society that raised us and in which we must live. While no one else will have an identical journey, we believe our experience, work, and reflections about our relationship and the communication and the communities we're members of may offer you insight into becoming the best mistress and the best slave you can become. In turn, we hope discovering the best kinky person in yourself will aid you in becoming the best person you can be in all aspects of your life. Along the way, we're going to challenge several of the most common ideas about BDSM, because sometimes belief in these concepts is a hurdle to creating an MS dynamic and can damage your ability to maintain MS for an extended period of time, from hours to a lifetime. A femdom and male-sum relationship that goes beyond sex, beyond playtime, and into the everyday for years and years requires courage from both partners. If you have that courage, or you want to learn how to find it in yourself, keep reading. By the time you finish with this book, you'll have a better idea of how to power your own relationship and make it work for you and yours. To help you with that goal, we've highlighted specific questions and activities that you should do as you use this book. First, you may be wondering why the second edition even exists. If you've read or listened to the original version of At Her Feet, you should be considering whether or not this book is worth your time and money. Did we really revise this book? Oh yes. In fact, we've added over 28% more material. We've both brought books that claim to be revised and new editions only to discover that the changes were minor. We don't want to waste our time and yours by giving you less than deeper dives, new insights, and specific activities to help you power your relationship and empower yourself. Did we do this just to make more money? No, we didn't spend months of work just for the money. Fact is that the first edition of this book is still selling. The original was written in 2009 and published in 2010. When this comes out in 2024, that will be 14 to 15 years later, depending on when you consider a book to be out. And a lot has changed in our lives, in the kink community and in the study of human sexuality, as well as in the Western world itself. All of those changes impact how someone can live a 24/7 kinky relationship. If you have the first edition, you just line up the initial questions and you'll get hints of where we've expanded. Next, we're going to briefly introduce ourselves and explain what you'll find in these pages. Tammy Jo Eckhart, PhD, is an ancient historian by training, a teacher by personality, a dominant by nature, and a published fiction author by fate. She has over 30 years of committed experience in BDSM. The chapter, The Creation of a Femdom, is part autobiography and part reflection on the common experiences of many female dominants she's met. Experiences that led them to the identity as dominants in BDSM relationships with a desire to go beyond the bedroom and into the life of DS. Fox graduated with a BS degree in physics and minors in both mathematics and psychology. He began investigating BDSM as a young adult in an effort to understand certain personal drives of exploration, which led him through, he began investigating BDSM as a young adult in an effort to understand certain personal drives and fantasies that seemed to differ from those of his peers. This is live, folks. That's how you know, because I'm making errors. His nearly 25 years of exploration led him through enough useful information and baseless crap to tell the difference between reality pretty quickly. In the chapter Creation of a Male Sub, he'll share some of the story behind how he and others of his generation recognized their kinkiness and found avenues to pursue it. Tammy Jo and Fox have been together in some form of DS or MS relationship since the autumn of 1999. We talk more about how we met and what led us into our mistress-slave life in chapter 3, How Two Became More. Again, that chapter is part autobiography, but primarily we want to share the challenges and rewards of our early relationship that may mirror your own, or at least provide an honest image of how these types of relationships can begin. The bulk of this book, chapter 4, is Making MS Work Every Day. It focuses on how we make this work, day in and day out, year after year, through some serious challenges. The truths we've learned, sometimes with a great deal of struggle, will highlight what we know are common issues for all MS and 24/7 dynamics, as well as point out the unique challenges that can face femdoms and male subs living in the Western society. Just like life, we'll cover the lively, kinky sides of things and the necessary mundane matters that we face together. We'll hold off on the purely titillating material. You can read my fiction for that. but otherwise hold a little back so you can learn from our mistakes and successes. We don't talk about subjects such as illegal slavery, blackmail, the idea that slaves can't leave their owners, or the superiority of one gender over another as the reason for why one is a slave or an owner. This is a book about consensual adult relationships, even if an outsider may have difficulty seeing that context. We'll say it again. This is about consensual adult relationships only. When it comes to topics with which we don't have personal experience, we either want to address them or we'll only touch upon them lightly because we want to offer you the best advice so you can empower yourself and your dynamic. The best advice must come from two places: knowledge and experience. If we haven't studied it or reflected on it as well as experienced it, but think it may be something you have questions about, we'll try to give you some resources in the footnotes. However, we make no claims that this book will cover every imaginable situation that someone in a femdom relationship could experience. Sometimes our stories and insights may seem far from your own, but we believe the truths we uncovered can help anyone who wants to build their life on a foundation of DS and power it through for years to come. We want this book to be inclusive. Did you notice that we said woman or feminine leaning as well as man or masculine leaning several times? Since the first edition of this book came out in 2010, public awareness of and discussion of the intersection and disconnection between biology, gender role model, and gender identity have become more widespread in the Western world. This is something that both Fox and Tammy Jo have been personally researching and feeling before they met each other. So we wanted to be sure to address this greater cultural awareness in the second edition of At Her Feet. While we do talk a lot about biology and gender in the book, we don't believe they're identical. Our bodies, our minds, our feelings, and the way the world interacts with each of us is complex. If you identify as wanting or being in a femdom relationship, then this book is for you, no matter your gender identity or what others may think. We've been told that some male doms, fem subs, and switches, that's someone who can enjoy different roles in kink, have even found the first edition of the book interesting because we're writing honestly about living the DS and MS lifestyle. Even with femdom in the title, we hope this book can speak to more people interested in exploring or invested in the lifestyle, so you can look beyond our use of gendered pronouns and notions. While we use feminine terms for the dominant and masculine terms for the submissive, this isn't meant to erase the fact that women and feminine leading people can also identify as submissive and be in a relationship with someone of the same gender. In this book, we'll try to use terms consistently, but the terms and abbreviations have changed over the years. What Tammy Jo learned as SM turned into BDSM in many circles and has been further divided into SM, DS, and BD, as well as a ton of other categories and classifications. Fox also learned the clinical terminology for studying human sexuality, but we're going to stick to more common usage and explain when we deviate from these terms. We'll only use our former partners' first names with their permission. Otherwise, you'll see people identified only by the scene names or initial. We'll try to keep everything and everyone clear, but with so many decades of experience, things are complicated. Authors, educators, and activists we've met, seen, or read will be mentioned by their published names, and we hope they consider this our ode to them and some publicity for their books to boot. For those who use scene names, alternative names to protect their identity, we'll respect their wishes and use those same scene names. We may even be vague at times in response to the desires of others to remain more anonymous. With the expansion of the internet and self-publishing, you as a consumer need to be wary of when, where, and from whom you get your information. We encourage you to read and learn beyond this book, so please do check the footnotes to find further information. The study of BDSM and human sexuality has expanded greatly since the first edition of this book came out. Education and experience do matter. We'll only be sharing sources that we've heard of and read and which meet our standard of quality. Note that anything we cite here shouldn't be considered the only or definitive authority. Do you remember that we mentioned this book is going to challenge some of the more common ideas of BDSM? Well, let's start right now. You've likely heard that the DS, dominant submissive, and MS, master slave relationship, are built on power exchange, right? Wrong. Go back and look at the title of this book. The entire book is designed to reveal the truth about that expression and show why it fails to help you create a happy full-time femdom relationship. We're going to look at how we each became empowered as individuals and how our mistress-slave dynamic continues to empower us as unique people, as a couple, as part of a polyamorous family, and as members of the BDSM community at large. Why? Power is what gives you the ability to do anything. Without it, you can achieve nothing. So you can't lose it if you want to make your relationship work. To make your relationship thrive, you have to exercise, direct, and enhance your power. What's often seen as a slave giving the mistress power is actually the recognition of her authority to direct that power. The slave must be the one to exercise the power itself, since there's very little that she could do to force him to act. Slaves forced into action are unlikely to do their best or be their quickest because their hearts and minds aren't in it. Every owner we've met wants the best and most efficient service possibly. So needing to force the slave every day and night undermines the owner's goals, and it leads to burnout. Use of force, whether physical, emotional, financial, etc., also raises the question of consent. And we'll repeat because it's of the utmost importance that this book is only about consensual adult relationships. Neither of us has lost or lent our individual power. By working together towards the mutual goal of a healthy and successful MS relationship, we help each other improve as people and as a couple, enhancing and increasing our power, and therefore directing a higher quality and greater quantity of power towards the dynamic itself. Beyond just the two of us, this power expansion also gives us the foundation from which to contribute to the well-being of everyone around us. When we were writing the first edition of this book, this would have sounded like a radical idea because it was commonplace to call BDSM and DS or MS a power exchange. But we're happy to report that since our book came out, discussion about power and authority have increased as a greater kink within the greater kink community. We're no longer just a handful of people refusing to say power exchange or dynamic. And instead, we identify that we live as an authority dynamic. Lot. Let me read the sentence again for you. We're no longer just a handful of people refusing to say power exchange or dynamic, and instead identify what we live in as an authority dynamic. Did we change the terms in thinking of other people? Possibly, maybe, even probably if we read the first edition of the book, but we aren't so arrogant as to think we created this authority versus power discussion out of nothing. Within some sub-communities of BDSM, what we do is still called power exchange. So that idea may still be radical in those circles. Therefore, we'll be returning to it over and over in this book. To paraphrase something Tammy Jo has said for years, mistress-slave relationships are both more mundane than you can imagine, more intense than you may be able to handle, and more rewarding than you can grasp when you first begin. They're not for everyone. And if you hope that a 24/7 femdom relationship where the woman consensually owns another adult is right for you, keep reading and working your heart and head through these chapters. Put in the effort to power yourself and your femdom dynamic. And then I just wanted to add, I mentioned that we have exercises in the new edition. There are actually 30 exercises. Those grew from a class I was asked to teach. And since I've had pedagogical training and I've taught for many years, we just try to distill it as best we could into these examples. They aren't really a substitution for the class, but we both thought they were a really good way to get people more engaged in just reading the book. So that's an introduction to the new edition. I don't know if you guys can leave comments or not. But I did bring other things to read, though right now at this moment, y'all, I need some water because my mouth is dry. Oh, whew. And warm too. All right. So I don't know, I cannot see the screen to see if we have questions or if people can ask them. But if you have any questions about the second edition of At Her Feet or anything like that, can people leave questions?
They can actually unmute
Okay.
and ask those questions now, and then we'll meet when you get ready to go through whatever else you're going through. If you guys have questions about At Her Feet, you can go ahead and unmute, raise your hand, and we'll get those questions answered, okay? We'll give it a few minutes,
Gives me more time to drink some more water.
right?
I just talk.
It doesn't look like we're getting any questions on that one. If you
Okay.
wanna head to your next one.
Okay, I guess that's kind of question. Would people like to hear some of the first chapters of my books that have come out in the past since the pandemic, basically?
If you guys want to hear the rest of those questions, if you guys want to give me an emoji, a thumbs up, or raise your hand, anything like that, we'd be happy to ask for her to do it. Yes, Lady O says absolutely.
Okay.
So we have some interest in it. Why don't you go ahead and we'll do that.
Well, we got vampires, day and tonight. We have my first YA novel called True You 101. And we have my new novel that came out last year. The second book will be out, I believe it's supposed to be out in August, of my new series called Almost Partners. So how about we start with True You 101?
Sounds great.
Because that's the oldest of these three.
Sounds great.
I may not read the entire chapter sheet, it's kind of long, but let me give you a little background. Tammy Jo, why did you write a YA novel? Tammy Jo, how could you write a YA novel? We've read your stuff, right? How can you do that? Circlet Press many years ago put out a book called Schoolboys and Spells. I think that was the title. And they were looking for people to do LGBTQIA stories that were urban fantasy. So urban fantasy is a genre where magic is real, but it's set in the now or the near future or the very recent past. So, technology and everything exists, but so does magic. So I had just finished reading a couple books about people who are intersex. An intersex person is born with genitalia, which can be confusing to other people. They'll go like, well, is that male genitalia or female genitalia? How does it all work? And I thought, that's a very human way of categorizing gender, isn't it? Why would someone who can use magic, why an entire culture of people who use magic, why would they be limited by human mortal concepts of what gender is? And so I wrote this story about a young mage who really just wants to be a girl, but who happens to be intersex and is hiding a secret at her magic school. And I heard back from the editor and he loved it. And he said, wow, I really wish I could use it, but you're the only person who sent in a positive story. I'm going to say that again. I really wish we could use it, but you're the only person who sent in a positive story. I was just surprised, right? Really surprised. And I thought, well, then wouldn't it stand out? But I guess he wanted to have a theme and didn't fit the theme. So he encouraged me to look other places. And eventually it turned into a novel. So let me read the beginning of it to you. It is called True You 101, and it is under the name TJ Eckhart, so that I also appear to be genderless. All right. Come on, pages work. Chapter 1, Most Loved, Most Hated. Dear Journal, most people believe that unless you are a certain age, you don't remember events clearly. Sure, tragedy can leave emotional scars, but details will be fuzzy. I remember everything about the day my parents failed to come home. It was the most terrifying day of my life. I'm Blake Trudeau, and I just know that as soon as I step across that classroom threshold, this is going to be the most terrifying year of my life, my sophomore year of high school. Welcome, new students. The professor greets us as we walk into her classroom. Most of us come in pairs, a few in trios. My best friend is already sitting in his desk when I look around the door. Sebastianus Hell's family lives on the same block as mine. We've known each other through his parents and my grandmother and uncle, who must meet regularly with other mages who have chosen to live in the borough of Brooklyn in the mortal world. Seb turns and waves at me, his grin wide. Of course, he is happy to be here. He isn't hiding a fundamental part of himself like I am. Where were you this morning? I ask him as I take my assigned seat. I know which desk is mine because it emits a soft white light that only I can see. I'm a couple rows down from Seb, but class hasn't begun for the day, so I stay standing and frown up at him when he just shrugs his shoulders. I waited at the bus stop, but you never came, I press. Seb looks directly at me for a moment. His gaze travels up and down my form, making me uncomfortable. His grayish blue eyes get a bit wider and a touch dilated. He's been looking at me more intently ever since he got back from his summer vacation 2 weeks ago. Normally he calms down after a few of my taunts, but today he swallows and looks pointedly away. I gotta get to campus earlier this semester. I thought I told you that. Did he? He told me all about his vacation. My uncle's job, like my parents used to do, keeps us close to the mortal world, so our vacations can't be 3 months long like the Hiles family summer vacations tend to be. He did mention something, so I asked, is this a football thing? I use the British term for the sport because my grandmother and uncle still use that word. Now he turns and frowns at me, his gaze directed at mine. I'm first student manager. I have to be there for practice before most of the other players. And it's soccer, not football. Oh, I replied, that's right. He was complaining about how he hadn't really bulked up over the summer or added more than an inch in height. I think he said he didn't want to be an average white boy any longer. Maybe he feels he doesn't stand out in a crowd here or in the mortal realm. But I always found his thin, straight, light brown hair interesting. I feel my cheeks heat up and take the approach of more students as an excuse to look away. I turn back when Seb calls down. I can still do lunch in the ride home. He adds with another shrug, if you want. Sure, I agree quickly. The students between us giggle, but I don't comment as I turn and sit down. Professor and her assistant are urging everyone to take a seat. So I get out my ritual case and my personal school journal. Each journal looks different if you take the time to examine them all. When I entered the Institute last year, mine was whiter. Now it's pale yellow, getting darker with each semester of classes. It also bears my name in a unique script that I wish my hand could make. The magic ink seems to undulate in ever-changing colors. My family's house sigil, a sturdy mountain goat, and the astrological signs from my birth date complete the cover decorations. Teachers use the journals to grade homework and track class development, but they can only see the pages that deal with their course. The purple box on one corner of the professor's desk channels magic that sends copies of the proper pages to the individual instructors. The first day of the class gives everyone the journal, gives everyone's journal the box treatment, but not today, not our first day of the term. Since everything else in the journal can only be read by me, I've been using it as my personal diary. In it, I can keep track of my feelings, too many, and physical changes, too few, without fear that someone might invade my privacy or demand access to it. The best thing about coming to magic school has been this journal. While every one of you knows your own name, or you should, the professor teases us, let me introduce you to the two of us, and then we'll get started. I am Denario Russo, and this is my 14th year at Reinhold, and my 12th year teaching True You. I take a good look at the teacher, noting her pale skin, subtle green eyes that are crinkled up with her smile, and her blondish red hair, which she wears pulled back. As she turns to the man next to her, I see that her hair is quite long, nearly to the small of her back, even though it is braided and falls in a straight line along her spine. She appears to be of average height and weight for most white women, but her form is clearly feminine, unlike my own. Professor Russo continues, and this is our tutor, Garant Lebet, who's been helping me for 3 years now. Contact information for both of us is inside the cover of the textbook you are now being handed. Tutor Lebet is a good hand taller than the instructor, but he's standing back from her out of respect for their roles. Something I noticed last year among all the classes I have teaching assistants. He has darker skin than the professor, but he's still paler compared to me, though his hair appears to be about as dark and thick as my own. He wears it closely trimmed, like my uncle's. I can't see his eyes well behind his square frame glasses. I guess this course won't correct vision problems. Not that I have to worry about that. Trudeau's have always had great eyesight. In the mundane world of collegiate academy, where everyone in New York City thinks I go to school, Professor Russo's course would be called Human Sexuality. Here at the Reinhold Institute of Sortilege Arts, the course is called True You 101. It's the most loved and hated course of the sophomore year. I look at the textbook, similar to the school journals, because each copy will be blood-bound to one student. The magics we'll be working with can track our progress, our changes, and our reactions on physical, emotional, and mystical levels. However, professors, tutors, and even administrators can read it at any time. At the end of the course, the books erase and reset for the next year. How do I know? I read all the materials my uncle gave me about this place at the end of 8th grade, when my grandmother informed me that I needed to leave the private school in Brooklyn and attend a magic school in Manhattan. My family taught me that the best way to keep a secret from the mortal world is to learn everything about it. I read, watch, and listen to everything I can get my hands on. I study things not even my family knows about, and certainly no one at school. I once thought about telling Seb, but I'm worried that he'll be afraid of me, as I am most days. I'm grateful when the professor speaks up again because it disrupts this distressing line of thought. Now that everyone has a textbook, Professor Russo instructs, let's perform the personal binding spell that hopefully you all remember from your first day of class last year. Everyone open your ritual kits and get out your knife. We're going to do this together. Both she and Tutor Lubbock get their kits out to perform the ritual with us. Their targets, though, are class binders and grade books. I slide the knife along my pinky finger and let a few drops of blood fall into the cover of the textbook as I recite the phrases with the rest of the class. The book glows for a moment, and then the fancy writing of my name appears in the upper left-hand corner of the cover. Excellent work, Professor Russo tells us. Now we'll turn to the first page. And Tutor Lubbock, will you do the honors of reading us the course syllabus? Of course, Professor. Welcome to True You 101, he says before beginning to read in a clear, calm, but luckily not monotone voice. The tutor for Mage History 101 last year nearly put me to sleep with his dry tones, and some of my early grades showed it. It takes him 10 minutes to read the syllabus, and by the time he's done, all of us have signed our names at the bottom of it, agreeing to the rules and regulations. When I went to mundane school from preschool through 8th grade, we rarely had syllabi. And when we did, most teachers just assumed we'd read them or not read them on our own. Everyone told me it was an easy out because no one could prove anything without the paper syllabus. If you wanted to get out of an assignment or get extra credit, you'd appeal to the teacher or have your parents talk to them. My grandmother and my uncle refused to intercede on my behalf for academic matters. But when I was bullied, they rushed in. After some girls saw my secret in 6th grade PE class, I got bullied a lot. My guardians became regular at PTA and parent-teacher meetings and put in routine appearances at the headmaster's and the principal's office. My uncle's job somehow allowed him to get any online bullying erased as soon as I brought it to his attention. The same mysterious job also permitted us to easily move to the States. Eventually, the bullies got tired and moved to easier targets. But the rest of that school year was a nightmare. My life improved when we moved to New York City, and I knew private mortal school for 7th grade. And that's when I started keeping my secret super close. Grandma and Uncle Delmar have stayed active here at the institution, but they haven't needed to make extra visits. I've worked hard to keep my secret safe by using hygiene spells we learned last year, coupled with some of my grandmother's herbal remedies to decrease any sweat I might work up in required physical courses. I've joined a few student groups that focus on arts and speech to build up some friendships, ones that value my mind versus my body. I just hope it will be enough to counter the bullying, when word spreads about what I am. The professor walks around looking at every textbook. She touches each one with a finger, which then glows white or red depending on the quality of the spell. Mine glows a bright white, and I catch a smile from her when I glance up. Magical work must be carefully done, so it is never acceptable to ignore the rules. I've known this since preschool. I've caught grandmother and uncle having whisper fights about my parents, and the words have made the biggest impression on me were against the rules, poorly executed, and if you had only planned more thoroughly. I'm not really sure what it all means, but I double and triple check everything I do. I don't want to mess up things so badly that I can't return home someday. I know how much that hurt me and grandmother, and I won't do that to her again. I glance back at Seb, but he's glancing toward Burnham Shuttery, who was voted the most handsome boy in our class last year for the yearbook. Burnham has golden tones to his dark skin, wavy, thick black hair, and shoulders are definitely wider than they were last term, along with a good half-foot of extra height. His eyes, though, always seem angry to me, so I can't understand what others see in him. Seb blushes when Burnham looks at him with a frown. Seb's blush darkens when he catches me looking at him, so I roll my eyes and turn back to the textbook. I sigh as I turn to the next page, the table of contents. The class covers the basics first. Eye color, hair color, length, the things even a mere mortal could change without much cost or effort. We start with the simplest topics so you can understand the magic and learn to adjust to each change, Professor Russo explains when the tutor pauses and looks towards her. I finger the ends of my two braids. It might be nice to have something other than this dark brown, thick and tightly curled hair. When the class will tackle ancestral heritage physicality, or what you might call race and ethnicity, Tutor Lubbock continues at the professor's nod. Long ago, physical environment affected the types of magical talents and practices that mages developed. Mages living in a hot desert environment would have no need to learn about cold magic, just as mages living on the shores of a great ocean would have little need to learn agricultural magic, or so our historians believe. But, like mortals, mages generally prefer to associate with others like themselves. Although that tendency can create very powerful mages, it can also cause stagnation, leading to errant or even dangerous talents. So it has become common for marriages to be arranged between mages of vastly different environments. He pauses and the professor interjects with a smile. Of course, the development of portal magic and mortal mass transportation, we don't need to arrange marriages anymore. Instead, we encourage our young people to travel and experience different cultures for themselves. Some of the students around me start giggling. The tutor continues about how magic came to the mortal realm, but I just tune it out since we learned all this last year. Through my parents, I was easily 3 different broad racial groups by mortal standards: white European, Western African, and East Asian. My looks and the fact that mom and dad were together weren't too shocking back in London, but in America, I have gotten a few second glances. This is especially true when I'm only with my grandmother. Her nose is slightly smaller than mine, her eyes are a little more shaped than mine, and our skin tones are significantly different. With my uncle, though, we barely get noticed because he looks more like me than my parents did. I push that realization aside and focus on what Tutor Levitt is describing next. Chapter 3 will change your physical form, but leave you in your natural ancestry. I frown for a moment, and again the tutor's voice fades as though my thoughts whirl. Okay, now that seems backwards. Wouldn't it be more challenging to be a different race than to just be a bit taller or fatter? I hope I won't be required to go thinner, since I'm not the biggest person to begin with. In fact, my uncle comments on if I don't seem to be eating enough. As though reading my worry, Tutor Lubbock pauses at this point and says, Chapter 4 can be traumatic, so think of the third as a bit of a break. Don't discount the challenges of your body being a bit different, Professor adds before the tutor continues. A few kilos here and there, an inch or two of height gained or lost, it can have a profound effect on many. The 4th topic makes me press my lips together tightly: gender and sexuality. This is probably where our class would overlap most with its rough equivalent in the mortal world, except it won't only be theory or empathy we work with. I glance down at my lap, certain I'm the only one worried about this. I've never known a different body, a different array of private parts. But I hope when all this is done, I can just be a normal girl. Most people look at me and think I am a girl, sometimes a tomboy or a princess, depending on what I'm doing and what I've decided to wear. At Reinhold, we all have identical blazers, shirts, trousers, and shoes. Only the most obvious physical traits, behavior, or accessories give clues to our gender. All our restrooms are a single admission to cut down on loafing when we should be somewhere more important. In the girls' gym room, we usually just magic ourselves clean and change uniforms without disrobing. That also makes hiding my secret easier because the tricks I employed in 7th and 8th grade, they are so normal now. Most of my classmates have been changing physically since arriving at the Institute last year. The girls changing more than the boys at this point, except me. My changes are subtle, hidden. These months in True may clarify what I am, but I am terrified at the same time. I want to be normal. But what if my normal turns out to be male? I don't know anything about dealing with the boys' gym room or their sports. And from what Seb has revealed, bullying isn't as subtle as it is with girls. And I don't know if I want to have to fight back. I run my finger across the gender and sexuality line in the table of contents and wish I can just become a normal girl when this is all over. There's a spell called Wish, but it's considered dark magic. I've seen it mentioned a few times in my uncle's papers and notebooks when I've discovered them unguarded. I doubt we'll learn it in every regulated school, but my mind starts going down the path of possibility over that spell, and I quickly brush it aside. The rules protect us. I have to trust and follow the rules. Professor speaks up after the tutor finishes reading the table of contents. I know that not every change will be as intense for all students. Each of you is unique, and by the end of this course, that will be even more true than it is right now. This is our first term where each of you will live at least part-time out in the mortal world. So we'll be taking our time with each category of transmogrification, so you and the magic have plenty of time to uncover your innate self. And I'm going to leave it there.
Okay, we do have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
And one of our people asked, what of all the ways we can buy your books, what way gets you the most money out of that sale? How can we best support you financially?
In terms of book sales, come to like convention or event I'm at and buy it directly from me.
Okay.
The other way is I have a Patreon page where I talk about something related to real life on Wednesdays. And then every other Friday, I put out a chapter in a serialized novel. I just finished my first serialized novel for my patrons with chapter 100. And in a couple of weeks, because I told them I'm going to take a break, I'll be starting a new novel just for them. And you can find all that on my website.
Okay, and what is that website?
It's tammyjoeckhart.com
Okay,
or thetammyjo.com.
okay. And I will be getting links to all of Tammy Jo's books, her Patreon, and her websites into the Friends of Carter Johnson group on FetLife later tonight.
Good question. Thank you. I'm gonna drink something else.
That's fine. What are the upcoming events where you will be?
I'm going to be next right after the 4th of July from July 5th through July 7th up in Indianapolis. There's a little fandom event called In Conjunction, and I will be there. I am their special artist guest, so I'm the second special author guest. I am their second author in the long list, and I'll be there in the dealer's room, and then I'm going to do a reading. I'm going to lead a panel, which has become a favorite at this event. It's called The Best Book I Read Since the Last In Conjunction. And I've done it for, I want to say the past 14 years or so at the event. So people asked for that. And then I'm going to be on a couple other panels talking about writing.
And will you be at MSC this year?
No,
No.
no, I won't be. It won't be. If we lived on the East Coast again, I would surely go to that, but
Right.
sadly,
Will you be at any events on the West Coast, maybe later this summer, this fall?
nope. I haven't gotten any invitations anywhere this year, but if people went to it, I did the online uh, MSC Worldwide. So I was there and I had 4 classes.
Okay,
So
all right. Are there any more questions? You can unmute and ask them, or you can put them in the chat and I'll ask her for you. No? Okay, do you have anything else you'd like to go over as far as books go?
do people want me to read something else? I know. So Mama Vi is over here, even though you can't see it. And when I mentioned the vampire, she was like nodding her head. So she might want me to read from that.
Yeah, I
But-
think she'd like to hear that. Let's do the vampire.
okay. And see, I put it in a red folder because I have to color coordinate things.
Now, what is that one called?
So it's called Day and Tonight, and it came out in 2021. And it is a new take on the vampire mythos. So my history degree is in ancient history, and this is based on Sumerian culture, religion, and stories about vampires, because vampires go back at least as far as Sumeria. And when I say at least as far, we're talking around 4000 BC. So we're talking a long time ago. It is told through interconnected short stories. And that type of novel is called a fix-up, which I learned. Not a very good name as a fix-up, but they're like interconnected short stories, and there's one single story that goes through the entire book that connects them all. So I'll read you a little bit of this. All right. Beginning of the old world. Bard is almost done. They are anxious to greet you. I glance in the mirror at John, looking the same as I did the day I met him in the park nearly 3 centuries ago. I return his announcement with a childish smile, but that doesn't work as well as it used to. You are the he reminds me. The new ones have been chosen. They've proven their worth. It's their first night. Oh, they'll want to hear the entire thing again, I sigh, pushing back a lock of reddish blonde hair that I may never grow used to. Tell them what you wish. Let the others talk for a change. They don't wish to, let Bard tell. Once more, my Aurum Awardum's counsel is wise. We're all sitting there, the 5 who had the families, their allies who aided in the final battle, and their older children around them. And the newly raised are seated in front. She and Damu, family all, as I willed it. I catch my greatest ally's eye as he sits perched on the back wall around the garden, his presence revitalizing it, as he wills it. After formulaic greetings, the pleading begins. Please, Uma, please tell us how you created our world. Tell us how Alamundi, Sakratum, Kashkaptu, Jael, and even Zul came to live in harmony with mortals. I hold up my hands and the crowd quiets. It is a very long story, I begin, and then deviate from the normal pattern for this event. And I cannot tell it alone. Your Abu must tell their stories as well, or Bard will do it for them. I have played upon their affections for their children. I have played upon their fears of the intermingling of truths and lies. One by one, my Dami agreed. John and Bard bring forth a chair, and for a moment, my heart aches on seeing Bard's white hair and the wrinkles around his eyes. I have struck a deal, so I must keep it. After a moment's pause, I speak. I remember running. I remember their screams. Fathers as they came to the farm. Fathers as they pushed him aside. Fathers as they stabbed him while I watched in horror from the window. I remember their screams. Brothers telling them to get off our land, then crying out for father, then crying for us all to run. And then there was nothing but a girl, I remember their screams, mothers ordering them out, and then silence till she yelled for us to hide. Then her cries to the goddesses to protect her until there was only a slapping sound, their laughter, and a gurgle. I remember their screams. Sisters, as she was pulled by her hair from beneath the bed, the sound of cloth being ripped, and her cries of anguish and pleas for mercy, and then her command to me, run. I remember running. I ran between their bodies as they did things to her that I don't even have words for. I ran over the cold stone floor, slipping on the cooling, sticky substance that dripped from my mother's still body. I ran over the door in my brother's cold mass, trying to block it. I ran over the earth and the grass matted from my father's slaughter. I remember running. I ran until I fell into the great water, what you call the Euphrates, but what we called Puranum. And I was carried until I could grasp a branch with my hands, tearing at it until my blood also covered the ground as I pulled myself up. I remember my pain. My stomach gave up the wonderful dinner that mother and sister had made for us that night, as all I could see were blood and bodies in my mind. I retched until I was as hollow in my stomach as I was in my heart. I remember my pain. My hands were torn, my blood was dripping down my arms to soak my nightshirt, my feet were pitted by the rocks and twigs that I had dashed through in my haste to obey. My legs were aching from that run, my lungs were gasping from the water, and my fingers felt like they were turning to ice in the black night. I remember my pain. My mouth opened and let out a scream that was primal and raw, that tore itself from my very depths. My throat burned until only a squeak came forth, and I collapsed on the ground, shivering. I remember them coming. He floated down, his beard flowing and his eyes two bright stars, his crown jutting forth into enormous bull's horns that made me tremble. The god An frowned down at me and heard my sorrow and declared, time shall have no meaning for you, child. The strength of the stars themselves, my warriors, will throw through you, and your vengeance shall know no better from now until eternity. I remember them coming. She flew down on her great eagle wings, her majestic head turning to and fro like a lioness watching her prey. But I was not afraid of the first mother of all. Ninhursag enfolded me in her wings and promised me, your 5 children shall live without fear of disease or old age. They shall offer you their protection and their loyalty, and they will praise you as they attempt to outshine you, but none shall. Your grandchildren will conquer those who dare stand in their way. You will be Amun to eternity. I remember them coming. He rose from beneath the earth, the sacred hoe in one hand, a sheaf of grain in the other, his beard laced with vegetables and flowers, and I smiled. Enlil lowered his gaze to me and then nodded his head, deciding, you will be driven to plant your seed far and wide, child, but you shall be wise where you plant it, determining the best vessels in which to lay it, and the best hearts in which to plant it, and the best bodies in which to instill it. But this wisdom may not pass to all your children. When this happens, remember that the wise farmer reaches for his scythe of bronze to cut his harvest. I remember them coming. He washed forth from the river on the backs of a goat and a fish. In his hands was his great staff with the entwined snakes that bathed in the fountains that flowed from his shoulders, and I was hopeful. Enki smiled at me and declared, your food and drink will flow through you and make all your desires manifest and potent. Those with whom you share your life force shall serve you day and night until eternity with all their renewed strength and being. I remember them coming. He descended on a winged bull, the moon shining through him, his lapis lazuli beard glowing, flecks of gold in his dark blue hair. Nana looked down on me as I cried and said, child, the moon will always guide you and lend you its strength, and your eyes will always find the light of it, even in the darkest night, so that you may forever thrive where others fall. You shall use their fears and their weaknesses against them and make them your fortress. I remember them coming. He came as a ray of light, solidifying into a handsome man, holding a scale in one hand and a scroll in the other, as his eyes shone their bright light through me, making me sink to my knees. Atu frowned and lowered his eyebrows in anger. Your soul demands retribution instead of trusting in your village chief and your city's king. But what was done was not just, and thus I will give you only this. Your life shall be hidden from my eyes, so I cannot see your vengeance. For should I see it, I shall consume you with fire. Carry out your heart's desire, but never forget that you will reap what you sow. I remember them coming. She rode up on her jeweled chariot, pulled by two fierce lions, a sword in one hand, a hitching ring in her other. Her hair flowed like honey, surrounded by the stars of the sky in her crown, and her naked skin shone with the desires of all creatures.